Harley-Davidson just did something no one expected. Unleashed a street-legal crate engine so powerful, it could redefine everything we know about American performance. This is not just about speed, it's about survival. Because what they just built might be the final chapter in the fight for combustion's soul. The moment Harley broke their silence. The moment Harley broke their silence for over a year, Harley-Davidson had gone quiet about anything new in the performance world. While the aftermarket grew louder and rivals like Indian roared past on the racetrack, Harley stayed silent until one sharp Arizona morning. It wasn't a press conference, it wasn't a flashy commercial, it happened trackside, almost off script, during a pre-season test session for King of the Baggers. Riders and mechanics were adjusting torque specs and testing fuel maps, and then, as casually as flipping a switch, Harley dropped a revelation that hit harder than any dyno number. A new 135 cubic inch crate engine. Factory built, race derived. Street legal. And not just any engine. This wasn't another minor bump in torque or a new air cleaner with flashy trim. This was the most powerful crate engine Harley-Davidson had ever released, born from the same race program that had dominated King of the Baggers and refined in the same workshops that build championship-winning machines. It was unexpected, it was dramatic, and for loyalists, it was deeply personal. For years, riders begged Harley to bridge the gap between factory and performance. They watched third-party builders outperform showroom bikes, and they knew the motor company had more to give. Finally, Harley listened. Finally, they acted. This engine wasn't just metal, it was a statement. But this wasn't just about excitement, it was about desperation. The pressure cooker that forced their hand. The pressure cooker that forced their hand for all the celebration and cheers. The truth behind this release was less romantic. Harley-Davidson didn't drop a 135 crate engine because it wanted to. It dropped it because it had to. The company has spent the last decade balancing on a knife's edge, squeezed by legacy expectations and brutal modern realities. And in recent years, that knife started to cut. Indian Motorcycle, once a distant shadow, had become a sharp rival, beating Harley on the track, in performance metrics, and among younger riders who saw Harley's image as stagnant. Custom builders and tuning shops were carving out more influence over Harley's performance identity than Harley itself. Meanwhile, the company's core buyers were aging fast. Harley needed something to pull attention back into its own house. Electric vehicles only made the pressure worse. While Harley's live wire experiment earned headlines, it did little to restore loyalty among gas-loving riders. Enthusiasts didn't want a quiet revolution. They wanted something loud, visceral, and rooted in tradition without sacrificing performance. The kind of engine that makes a garage shake and turns a wrench into a weapon. Even Harley's premium offerings had lost momentum. The custom vehicle operations line, once the crown jewel of Harley's lineup, was pricing itself into irrelevance. High price tags weren't enough to justify outdated output. The fans didn't want chrome, they wanted compression, and that demand was reaching a boil. So Harley made a decision. They stopped waiting, they stopped chasing electric hype. They turned back to the one place where Harley still wins, the racetrack. But getting this kind of power into a street-legal package nearly tore the motor apart. If you're loving what Harley's doing with this crate engine, give us a like, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to stay ahead of the curve in motorcycle performance and innovation. The engineering gamble that nearly failed. The engineering gamble that nearly failed. When Harley's engineers began designing the 135 crate engine, they faced an uncomfortable truth. They couldn't simply bore the cylinders wider or stretch the case limits. To reach that extra displacement, they went with a riskier move, stroke-only expansion. A new 4 5/8 inch crankshaft. The longest ever in a factory Milwaukee 8 motor. It sounds simple, but it forced a cascade of high-stakes redesigns. The rod length had to remain the same for manufacturability. That meant re-engineering piston height and compressing the ring stack area, which risked sealing integrity, a fatal flaw in an air-cooled performance engine. To solve it, they pulled one of the oldest racing tricks in the book, gas porting. By carving directional channels into the top ring, combustion pressure helps seal the piston tighter against the cylinder wall. This allowed them to drop from a 1.5 mm ring thickness to a 1 mm configuration, reducing friction without losing seal strength. But friction wasn't the only enemy. Heat was worse. With only 4 head bolts and massive thermal distortion, the 135 crate engine was a ticking bomb in early testing. Everything had to work perfectly: cooling, lubrication, fueling, combustion symmetry. Then came emissions. Harley had to prove this beast could run clean enough for street legality. That's where injector targeting, spray pattern, and oil scavenge design played a make-or-break role. Everything came down to balance: more fuel, more air, more stroke, more fire, without triggering regulatory disapproval. And just when engineers thought they had done the impossible, Harley dropped a pricing bomb no one saw coming. Want gear that matches this level of power? We listed top-tier jackets, gloves, and helmets in the description. No gimmicks, just real performance. The $8,000 bombshell, the $8,000 bombshell. Nobody saw it coming, not at that price. When Harley-Davidson officially announced the new 135 cubic inch crate engine would be available for around $8,000, jaws didn't just drop, they shattered. For years, performance upgrades from the factory meant compromise. Either you paid sky-high prices for Screamin' Eagle bolt-ons that barely moved the needle, or you went custom, risking reliability, legality, and warranty support. But now, Harley had thrown down a gauntlet. For the cost of a mid-tier exhaust setup and a weekend in the garage, riders could get their hands on the most powerful street-legal motor Harley had ever offered, fully assembled, emissions-compliant, and covered by the Screamin' Eagle warranty. The economic implications rippled immediately through the aftermarket. Custom engine builders who had long thrived on piecemeal upgrades and hand-built big-bore kits now faced a factory-built monster that outpaced many of their offerings and came with none of the headaches. There was no guesswork, no tuning roulette, no parts compatibility risks. This engine was plug-and-play for Milwaukee 8 platforms, backed by Harley's own powertrain operations facility and tested to the same standards as every production model. For the first time in decades, Harley's factory-built performance option didn't just compete with the custom world. It beat it on price, support, and peace of mind. And then came the quiet part. Harley had deliberately made this affordable. This wasn't an accounting error. It was a declaration of war against the idea that performance must come with pain. Dealerships were prepped to install. Screamin' Eagle parts were in the pipeline. The $8,000 crate engine wasn't just a new product, it was Harley rewriting the rules of performance economics. But this wasn't just about undercutting the market, it was a targeted strike. Target acquired, Indian Motorcycles. Target acquired, Indian Motorcycles. Harley could have released this engine quietly. They could have kept it niche, limited, and buried under layers of dealership upselling. But they didn't. The 135 crate motor was a shot aimed squarely at one rival, Indian Motorcycles. In the last few years, Indian's rapid rise in king of the baggers racing had done more than win trophies. It had stolen cultural legitimacy. Their dominance on the track, powered by S&S motors and a new school image, had painted Harley into a corner. The once undisputed heavyweight champion of American muscle was being outpaced, outclassed, and out-innovated by a younger, hungrier brand. The new crate engine was Harley's answer, and it was personal. This wasn't just about horsepower, it was about reputation. Screamin' Eagle, long the underdog in the performance parts arms race, had been quietly building its credibility back through factory-backed racing, and now, everything they'd learned on the track was being handed directly to riders in the form of this engine. The exact throttle body, the same CNC manifold, the internal secrets that powered Kyle Wyman's wins, all of it, now available to the public. This wasn't just a flex, it was revenge. Indian had embarrassed Harley on its own turf. For a century, Harley owned the roads, the rallies, the image of American power. But Indian had proven it could dominate the part that really mattered to younger riders, performance. With the 135, Harley was clawing back that ground. They weren't just responding, they were hunting. The engine's release coincided with Harley's most aggressive race season yet, blurring the lines between track and street, between racing pedigree and consumer product. The war between Screamin' Eagle and S&S was no longer a subplot, it was going mainstream. Racing teams had become laboratories, consumers had become combatants, and Harley wasn't just fighting Indian, they were fighting themselves. A rebellion inside the factory. A rebellion inside the factory. Internally, the decision to greenlight the 135 crate engine wasn't smooth. It was a battle, and not a quiet one. Within Harley-Davidson's own walls, factions clashed over the engine's existence. Engineers from the Screamin' Eagle division had been quietly developing race tech with real-world potential, but executives were nervous. The company had been burned before, too much R&D cost, not enough return. Memories of the live wire's overpromised revolution still lingered. Did Harley really want to gamble again? But this time was different. The engineers had leverage, racing wins, hard data. They brought results from King of the Baggers, dyno sheets, and endurance logs. The numbers didn't lie. This engine was already proven in the most brutal real-world testing imaginable. And yet, resistance persisted. Emissions were a concern. Production costs looked risky. There were fears the average Harley owner wouldn't be able to handle the install, or worse, wouldn't want to. Dealers, too, voiced hesitation. Would they need extra training? Would install costs scare away customers? Would the company deliver enough units? And yet, the pushback came with a quiet undercurrent of excitement. This was the first time in years that a Harley performance product felt truly authentic, truly competitive, and most importantly, truly desired. Pride and paranoia battled behind every closed-door meeting. Some wanted to preserve Harley's image, others wanted to rebuild it entirely. The 135 was approved, stamped, and prepped for launch. And while insiders clashed behind closed doors, regulators were already watching. The EPA line they dared to cross. Building a crate engine this powerful, and making the EPA line they dared to cross at street legal, should have been impossible. But Harley did it. And not by accident. The company had been walking a razor's edge between power and compliance for years, and the 135 marked their boldest step yet. The risk was enormous. One slip, one emission standard violation, and the entire engine could be pulled from shelves before a single rider heard it roar. So how did they do it? It came down to obsession. Engineers focused on the details most brands would ignore. Gas-ported rings were used to maintain pressure and seal even under extreme heat. Injector targeting was recalibrated down to the millisecond. Dual spray patterns ensured clean burns. And every adjustment came from one source: race testing. What had once been an experimental workaround to survive road Atlanta was now the key to passing the Environmental Protection Agency's street standards. There was no margin for error. With only 4 head bolts holding down each cylinder, distortion under combustion pressure was a constant threat. Air-cooled engines don't play nice with emissions labs, but Harley found a way to tame the beast. Every piston, every valve, every component was optimized not just for performance, but for legality. That 10% power increase wasn't achieved by luck. It was engineered with surgical precision, right to the edge of what was allowed. The result? A fully street-legal, emissions-compliant, race-borne engine that made no apologies. Suspense turned to defiance. Relief gave way to pride. The 135 didn't sneak past regulators. It roared through. And now, it sits in showrooms across America daring riders to choose power with purpose. But this engine wasn't just a legal win. It sparked a cultural war Harley could no longer contain. The culture war Harley couldn't contain. This wasn't just an engine release. The culture war Harley couldn't contain was a spark in a long smoldering culture war inside Harley-Davidson. On one side stood the traditionalists, the riders who believed that a Harley should be slow, loud, and dripping in chrome. These were the purists, the veterans of bar and shield loyalty, who saw crate engines and computer-optimized power curves as corporate heresy. On the other side stood the performance crowd, the ones who wore leathers to the drag strip, not the diner. For them, the new 135 crate motor wasn't an insult to tradition, it was liberation. Inside the company, the divide ran just as deep. Engineers had been pushing for race-derived performance parts to reach the public for years, but marketing teams worried that high-tech engines would alienate Harley's aging core. Executives feared cannibalizing existing models, especially the lucrative CVO line, but the engineers kept pushing, driven not just by the thrill of speed, but by the need to evolve before it was too late. That push finally broke through the bureaucratic dam with the 135, and once it did, Harley's internal tension exploded onto forums, trackside garages, and dealership floors. Some saw the new crate motor as Harley's last gasp of innovation. Others saw it as a betrayal. What they all agreed on: this engine wasn't just hardware, it was a statement of intent. And on the streets, riders were already choosing sides. Why this engine matters to riders. Why this engine matters to riders for many riders. The 135 crate engine isn't about horsepower. It's about being seen. For years, performance-minded Harley owners had to cobble together their dream bikes from catalogs, aftermarket parts, and machine shop compromises. They had been ignored, priced out, or told to wait for the next big thing that never came. This motor, factory-built, track-tested, and Screamin' Eagle certified, is the first time Harley has looked those riders in the eye and said, "We see you." Wrenchers who've been loyal to the Milwaukee 8 platform finally get a top-tier upgrade they don't have to build from scratch. Drag racers who used to be sidelined by EPA compliance rules now have a race-inspired engine that's street-legal and covered under warranty. And veterans who never gave up on the dream of American-made power are finding pride again in a factory offering that doesn't feel watered down or overly sanitized. It matters because it proves Harley can still listen. It matters because it delivers performance without apology. And most of all, it matters because it bridges the gap between what Harley was and what it could become. For thousands of garage builders, this engine is a kind of redemption, a long overdue acknowledgement that their loyalty wasn't misplaced. But redemption doesn't guarantee survival. Can Screamin' Eagle save Harley's lineup? Can Screamin' Eagle save Harley's lineup? The question hanging over Harley-Davidson isn't whether they can build great engines. It's whether they can still build great bikes people actually want to buy. The 135 is impressive, but it's also a symptom of something deeper: Harley's shrinking performance lineup. The Sportster is on life support. The Softail performance segment has been diluted by style over substance models. Even the CVO bikes, once the pinnacle of Harley excess and prestige, now face criticism for bloated pricing and minimal innovation. Screamin' Eagle might be Harley's last real hope for product excitement. As the core lineup flattens, more and more attention is turning to crate solutions, customizable, upgradable, high-performance alternatives that give power back to the rider. Harley isn't just selling engines anymore, it's selling possibilities. And that's no accident. Behind the scenes, Screamin' Eagle is slowly becoming Harley's skunkworks, its innovation lab, its credibility engine, and its last connection to real grassroots culture. If this works, the brand could finally bridge its showroom strategy with its racetrack wins, giving riders what they actually want instead of what the brand thinks they should want. But it's a dangerous bet. If the 135 fails to sell, or if it alienates Harley's remaining core, there may be no pivot left. Screamin' Eagle can't save the lineup alone, but right now it's the only one left trying. So Harley leaned on the one thing still working: competition. King of the Baggers wasn't just a race. At first, King of the Baggers sounded like King of the Baggers wasn't just a race, a joke. Who would race two 800-pound motorcycles around a track like they were sport bikes? But what started as a spectacle became Harley's most powerful development platform, and its last real source of performance legitimacy. The 135 crate engine is living proof. It didn't come from a focus group, it came from a racetrack. What began as Screamin' Eagle testing parts for Kyle Wyman's race bike quickly turned into something bigger. Each lap provided real-time data. Every podium finish turned into a parts upgrade. The throttle body, manifold, cam plate, almost every core element of the 135 came from lessons learned during hard laps and hotter engines. Racing stopped being marketing fluff. It became research and development. It became Harley's new lab. Now, the company treats its race team like a frontline unit. Feedback loops between track and factory are tighter than ever. The mentality has changed. Instead of building bikes for showroom appeal and hoping they perform, Harley is now letting performance lead and letting form follow function. That shift might be Harley's smartest move in years, because every time the brand wins on the track, it earns back something even more valuable than horsepower: trust. Riders don't just want more performance. They want to know it comes from somewhere real,